Happy Sabbath. We are coming to you from the Dinuba Seventh-day Adventist Church, where we have just heard a dynamic presentation about the Godhead from a keynote speaker, Denis Kajzer, who presented the topic from anti-Trinitarianism to Trinitarianism, the Adventist story. Dr. Kaiser is assistant professor of church history at the Seventh-day Adventist Theological Seminary at Andrews University in Berien Springsu, Michigan, and he is also the annotation project editor of the Ellen Vajt Estate's Letters and Manuscripts for the Ellen G. Vajt Estate. Welcome. Also with me is Nathan Renner, a pastor here in Central California Conference. Nathan, you have some questions to ask Dr. Kaiser.
Yes, Dr. Kaiser, thanks so much for an exciting presentation. I was super blessed to see the flow of the doctrine of Trinity throughout the history of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. One thing that you said at the very beginning I found particular interest in, that at the Council of Niceia, the church, in their expression of the doctrine of Trinity, said that Jesus emanated from the Father, but that this happened in a timeless state, and therefore Jesus could be emanated, generated, but still eternal, and that Adventism views God not as timeless, but having something to do with time. And so many early Adventists saw Jesus as having a beginning of some sort. So my question is then, does the current anti-Trinitarian position that often we hear in Seventh-day Adventist Church, does it then have more in common with Roman Catholic theology of the Trinity than the Seventh-day Adventist Church's theology of the Trinity? I want to be gracious. I'm not trying to throw them under a bus. I'm just... Can you unpack that for us a little bit? I mean, I basically preached a sermon, so, unpack it. I'm sorry for such a long question.
Thank you so much for the question. That's a very good and valid question, I think. And in a way, it's interesting that there are similarities between, you could say, the early Adventist views on the Trinity, or not the Trinity, but Christ, and the relationship between Christ and the Father, and the Nicene view, and of course also the modern Adventist anti-Trinitarian views, but only in respect to Christ's origin from the Father. Okay. So that he emanated from the Father, that he came forth from the Father at some point. And the difference, of course, is that in Nicaea, and that would be the Catholic view, they believe that Christ came forth in timelessness. And so since it happened in timelessness, and the eternal present, he doesn't really have a beginning. Yeah?
Correct, okay.
And so early Adventists, as well as modern Adventist anti-Trinitarians, they would say that Christ had a beginning because it happened in time. And so in that sense, you could say, since Adventists in general today believe that Christ had no beginning, that God is not bound to time, but so he might be timeless, but he can enter time, he can enter space. He is in that sense not bound by time and space. Yeah? But that Christ, the Holy Spirit, and the Father all have no origin, that they existed from all eternity. And so in that sense, in this regard, in that aspect, or the official position of the Adventist Church is very different from the Catholic view. And in that sense, regarding Christ, early Adventist and modern Adventist anti-Trinitarians actually are closer to Catholicism than we are today with our official position.
Wow.
But that's one aspect of it. Yeah? Of course, when it comes to the concept of the Trinity, that there are three persons that are somehow unified, there, of course, we believe in the same concept. But the details are very different. Yeah?
Right. Oh,
And it's because of that time and space narrative and construct that you gave to us initially.
And for us, it's also, we believe that ultimately what combines these three individuals is relational, has to do with love. Actually, with this aspect of unselfish, other-focused love.
Relational.
And if God is love, and love is defined as unselfish, other-focused, then he cannot exist by himself. So,
can't be a
in that sense,
singularity, yeah.
before anything was created, he must have been already in communion with other individuals. Because otherwise, he would have been alone. And love cannot exist by itself. And so the Catholic view, however, believes the focus is more on the nature, on the ontology in that sense, because it doesn't believe that God has any feelings. It doesn't believe that God has emotions, because that would take away from his perfection.
So the fact that God would have feelings as a person, a persona, then would make him less than perfect.
Because if you have feelings, feelings change. And based on Greek philosophy, they said if there is change in any way, then it's not 100%. It's not perfect.
Yeah.
I appreciate
And that's not our view of
Of course,
perfection.
yes.
Our view of perfection is that there is possibility for emotions, that there is possibility for love, and that there is possibility also for growth, for example. You know?
Did that Catholic view of feelings being somewhat suspect originate from the Greek mythological views of Greek
Yes.
gods and feelings and all of those Greek gods erring somewhat because of their feelings? Is that where that stemmed from?
You have basically, in Greek philosophy, you have various strands.
Correct.
And of course, one is that there are many gods that are very different. And because they are different, they are also different gods in that sense.
They all have
And
different
so
functions.
They have different functions and
Yes.
so on. However, there was the idea that ultimately there is somehow a supreme being or something that is perfect, and then this being cannot be subject to time and space, and cannot be in any way subject to change.
Which is really the core thing that Adventism rejected when it embraced the sanctuary. It embraced a God who interacts in time and space, and therefore a personal God, a relational God, a God of love.
Exactly.
And that changed everything that we believe, whether it was about the Sabbath, about what happens when you die, about the Trinity. Now, when you described the trajectory of Adventism from anti-Trinitarian to Trinitarian, I really appreciated how you pointed out that there were subtle trends very early that gathered speed beginning in 1888 and afterward, and that it wasn't until after those trends had been initiated that Ellen Vajt really began to strongly confirm the direction the church was beginning to head. How did discovering that impact you in your journey from being anti-Trinitarian to being Trinitarian?
I think for me it was very important because I realized that early Adventists did not receive everything all at once, particularly their understanding of God. And I also realized that they grew in understanding, they continued to study, they were open to discover new things. And so while I was studying those things in the Bible, I studied Adventist history as well as in the Bible, and I began to see that their insights were actually truly biblical. And so that helped me to also, let's say, have open eyes to what the Bible actually teaches about it.
All right.